I'll start over. Tonight, our speaker is Heather Stoven, and Heather is an assistant professor serving as community and small farms horticulturalist for Yamhill County. She has experience in the nursery industry. I'd love to talk to her about that because I think working in a nursery would be fun. Working in propagation, pest management, media preparation, fertility, and irrigation. And Heather's focus this evening is going to be talking about biological pesticides. And people, as you have questions, please insert them in the chat function. And at the end of Heather's presentation, we will go through the questions together. And so Heather, take it away.
Sure, thank you very much. So I'm going to share my presentation. So hopefully that will all work for you. All right, so can you all see this?
We can see it.
Great. All right, well, thank you very much for inviting me to present to your group today. I'm really excited to have all of you here and interested in alternative and biological pesticides. So a little bit about myself. So as was mentioned, I worked in the nursery industry, and one of the positions that I have had at the nursery industry was a plant health foreman. And so what I did there was to scout for pests, and then I had a crew of individuals who worked for me who would do pesticide applications, apply fertilizers, and do all kinds of different things. So I got to work quite a bit with different kinds of products and pesticides. So at any rate, I think that will be helpful as we go through this presentation today. So just so you know a little bit about me. So tonight we're going to be talking about a few different things. So I'm just going to start and give an overview of pesticides. Then I'm going to be talking about biorational pesticides, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means as I get there. And then I'll talk about common biorational products for gardeners, and then talk about organic and other product designations, because I know people often ask about, well, what about organic? So we'll discuss that a little bit as well. So we're just going to kind of start out and talk about why are pesticides used. So I've coordinated the Master Gardener program in Yamhill County since 2014. And so I have given the pesticide presentation to all those Master Gardeners in Yamhill County, I think since I started with the program back then. And I've, sometimes Master Gardeners will, be, why do we need pesticides at all? Why is that something that we even need to do? And I think as home gardeners, we have, some more options than a commercial, farmer may have, for example, because they have a lot more crops to handle than we do as gardeners. So we have a few more options out there. But in general, pesticides can be used because they're typically effective, which can be helpful, like I said, especially if you're a farmer and you have 200 acres of property or more. So if you have an outbreak of an insect, a lot of times as a master gardener, something we recommend that they squish the aphids or wash them off with a hose. And obviously that's not going to be super effective or practical if you have a large area. So pesticides can be useful there. And another thing that I think is important for gardeners to think about is that we, I think, have a responsibility as consumers when it comes to purchasing produce, vegetables and fruits, that, we go to the grocery store and I think there's that expectation that everything looks perfect all the time. And we have, these fruits and vegetables kind of like these pears and apples and oranges, and they look perfect. But I think when I worked in the nursery industry, anything that had any pests on it, it got returned and shipped back to us. So if we as consumers are able to accept a few more pests, I think there can be less pesticides used. So something to keep in mind for that as you're shopping, that a few spots shouldn't turn you away. And then there also can be regulations requiring sprays for shipping. So as I mentioned, working in the nursery industry, here in Oregon, sometimes we'll have pests that they don't have in other places. And so they may need to be sprayed, by nursery industry or other industries as well. other farms, for example, if you're to ship a crop someplace else. So kind of keep that in mind. So sometimes we need to use pesticides. So I was just talking to Janet prior to this presentation, and we talked about how overwhelming it can be to go to the store. So I don't know if anybody has felt that way when you go, especially to a big box store and they have just shelves and shelves of products. And so I'm hoping I can demystify that a little bit for you all, but I know that it still requires research, like anything in this world, you kind of have to know what you're looking for and do some research beforehand. But I hope I can help you to kind of demystify the pesticide aisle a little bit and help you to choose a less toxic product. So here's kind of an example of, you go into the store, you see all these shelves. Here's one, we have malathion, which is, broad spectrum spray. It's $11.99, and then we have a microbial product, BT, right next to it for also $11.99. So it's just kind of funny that, sometimes things don't even get separated. So, how do you know? So one thing you can look at is chemical classes. And so that's something that will be on the label. And so when you go into a store, don't be shy. You can take, the labels, they will peel off the back of the pesticide. You can, peel it off and open it up and look at it. So I would recommend doing that or doing some research prior to going to the store. So you can look for things like chemical classes, and it'll say this on the label. Sometimes it can be hard to find things on the label if there's anyone that has looked at the label of a product, and hopefully if you've sprayed a pesticide, you have read the label prior, but trying to look for this information can be helpful. So some of the chemical classes that you may look for, organophosphates and carbamates, these are kind of the older chemical classes. And these are generally considered to be some of the greatest risk for human health. They are older products. They're often contact or broad spectrum products. So they can, kill many different kinds of pests. They're not necessarily selective, if that makes sense. The next group you could look for potentially are pyrethroids. And so these are synthetically produced chemicals that mimic a compound produced in chrysanthemums known as pyrethrin. So you may have heard of pyrethrin before, or pyrethrum, and it comes from a chrysanthemum. So you can of course buy this on its own, and that's more of a reduced risk product, or you can buy pyrethroids, which are the synthetic product that are based on that chemical formula or formulation. And the thing with the synthetically produced product is that they tend to last a lot longer. And so you could spray it and that would last, on the plant a lot longer than the natural pyrethrin. So kind of keep that in mind. And then both of these products are toxic in aquatic ecosystems and to bees as well as the organophosphates and carbamates are also toxic to bees. And of course, many of you are familiar with the neonicotinoids. There's been a lot of talk about these over the years. Do their systemic properties and their toxicity to bees. So these products work by going through the plant and being available in the phloem. And so when a sucking pest, so these products work on like whiteflies and aphids and mealybugs and that sort of thing. So when they put their stylets in and feed on the phloem, then they're going to bring up this insecticide. And so the thing about these particular products is they're on the safer side to humans, but they are typically they're going to be more toxic to bees. So sometimes there's kind of a give and take with these products. And then we have soaps and oils. So a lot of these are going to be botanical. There's all kinds of different oils out there and soaps. And they are often going to suffocate insect pests. So you need to have good contact. And then whatever you spray often will, have a negative consequence, but they often need to be reapplied often, because if an insect moves in, then it would need to be reapplied again. And one thing with these types of products is make sure that you're purchasing a product that's meant to be used as an insecticide. So I think there's all kinds of different home remedies that you can find on the internet for, a soap product, but make sure you're purchasing something, an insecticidal soap like Safer soap or something like that, that's meant for spraying as an insecticide, because otherwise you don't really know how well it's going to work. It can cause phytotoxicity. These products can change the formulation, so I would avoid that. Microbials are something that we're going to discuss in more depth today. So an example of this would be BT or Bacillus thuringiensis. So they could be bacteria or viruses or that sort of thing that are used to control pests. And of course, there's additional classes as well, but I just kind of wanted to mention the major ones. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that for home gardeners, I think it's interesting that there's all these different combination products, and it tends to not be the case as much for commercial growers, which is funny because commercial growers have to have a license, for spraying and that sort of thing. But home gardeners, they tend to make all these combination products. And so here's an example, this rose shield for spray on roses. And if you didn't really know what you're looking for, you don't really understand what all of these things are. So this has a fungicide, this first product here, or an active ingredient. Then there's thiamethoxam, which is a neonicotinoid, which is the group that's systemic and controls sucking pests. And then you have lambda-cyhalothrin, which is a pyrethroid, which was the synthetic product that is toxic to bees and to aquatic systems. And so this is going to, of course, help with diseases as well as sucking type pests. And then the lambda-cyhalothrin is going to be more of a contact product. So you can see how, is this something that you really need? Do you need a contact product and a systemic product and a fungicide? Or are you just spraying because you found a few spots and this said rose shield on it? So kind of keep that in mind. The other thing you can look at is signal words. Danger poison is something that is only available for those with the pesticide license. So you won't find this in a big box store or garden center. You can have danger, which is going to be, again, less common, I think, for home garden products, but there are some that can be corrosive, especially when it comes to like copper products. They can have issues with eye damage. Warning are moderately toxic products, and then caution. So I'd say most products are in the store that you find are probably going to be at the caution level. So again, another thing to kind of look for. So here we are, we're in the store. I just took a random picture of some chemical products. And so you can see by looking at these labels, we have, a complete insect killer, two-way formula, kills surface insects in 24 hours, and then it kills soil insects for up to 3 months. So this is kind of telling us in its way that this has a contact insecticide and it has a systemic, and this is apparently supposed to be applied to the soil. But here in Oregon, I don't really know what insects we have in the soil that you need to have this systemic spray. So that's something to kind of think about. We have this malathion here. We have 7 ready to use, kills over 100 insect pests. So we can kind of tell with some of those, complete killers, kills over 100 insect pests, those are going to be more broad spectrum products. And then we can have selective products, kind of like we have our systemic houseplant insect control. And so that's going to be, those systemic products are generally going to have like a neonicotinoid in them that would help for, long-term issues. And so that might be something where a product like that might make sense because you don't have pollinators inside your house. You don't have to worry about, being toxic for bees or something like that. And maybe you have an aphid infestation or you have mealybugs or something like that. And so, if you had a large plant and it's hard to kind of hose it down, maybe that's some place where that selective product might make a little bit more sense. And then we're going to have some of these biorational pesticides. So this is something that when Alan Taylor contacted me last year, actually, it was quite a while ago that we organized this and wanted me to present to you all today. This is kind of the train of thought that I think he wanted to go down. So this group of pesticides includes botanicals, microbials, mineral type products, and then growth regulators. So I'll talk a little bit more about these as we go through here. So again, here's our photo in the store. A few things that I wanted to say that I've kind of alluded to already is that some products can be low risk to humans, but they can be toxic to wildlife. And so you kind of have to balance that and see where you're at in your particular situation. I mean, if you don't want to apply something that's toxic to bees during the blooming season, or if things are going to start to bloom, you know, in the next few months or something like that. So keep that in mind. Many products also can have like green on the label or natural. And this is kind of like when you go to the grocery store and it will have like natural on top of, you know, the sausage label or something like that. And you think to yourself, you know, is this sausage really natural? What does that mean? So the same thing can apply for pesticides. And it's not really a regulated term. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't have to qualify for something to have natural on the label. It's not like an organic label. So kind of take that with a grain of salt if you say that on a label. A lot of times, you know, indeed it will be from a natural source, but it's not a requirement. Another thing to think about is that these products are all going to have inert ingredients, often adjuvants. So this is going to be like your spreaders and stickers that are going to be included in there. So they were going to help a product spread over a leaf, for example, if you spray it so that it has good coverage. So some of these can also potentially have some pesticidal properties, but you won't necessarily know, you know, what's in there. So I guess sometimes this might make sense if you're worried about this to purchase an organic product. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get down to organic. So just kind of keep that in mind that, you know, that there's more in the container than just what the active ingredients are. All right, so let's talk a little bit about our biorational pesticides. So we can have botanical pesticides, so things that would fit into that category. So they're going to be plant derived, basically. So we can have things that are oils, and there's all kinds of different oils out there. I mean, you can go to the store and find dozens of oils in the pesticide aisle. So they're going to be peppermint and clove and cinnamon and pepper oil and, you know, on and on and on and on. So one thing to keep in mind with that is that a lot of times, I'm not sure that there's a ton of research about every single one of these oils and every, you know, and all the different plants and all the different kinds of pests. So you might want to do some research if you're going to go down the plant-derived oil category, so to speak. I'm not sure that I would be able to say you should use peppermint oil over clove oil or one of the others. So kind of keep that in mind. There's also other oils that are sold out there as well that may not be plant derived as well. So you may see, you know, mineral oils in the aisle or something like that, as well as there's of course dormant oils that should be applied more in the winter. So these are going to be lighter oils that could be applied during the growing season, but keep in mind that oils in general can cause phytotoxicity or burnt leaves, and you shouldn't apply them, you know, during the heat of the day in the summertime. Neem oil and just neem in general is a product that's derived from the neem tree, which is a tropical tree, and it has just natural insecticidal properties. So an oil type product can be used to maybe smother insects like these other oils, but then neem itself can be applied in other ways. And I'll talk a little bit more about its activity here in a second. So pyrethrin, I mentioned earlier, and this is a pretty common product that you'll see in the store. And so it is derived from the chrysanthemum flower here. And so when it's sprayed onto a plant, when an insect eats it or touches it, it excites its nervous system, and then that can lead to death. So this product can be used for many different kinds of insects, and it also can be toxic to bees. But the good thing about pyrethrin is that you pretty much have to apply it, you know, when bees are foraging in order for it to cause a problem, because it doesn't last very long on the plant. So if you were to spray this in the evening, for example, then typically, you know, by the next day it'll have broken down enough where it'll be safe for bees again. So it has a short period before it breaks down. So even though it can be toxic to bees, it's generally not like a long lasting product that, you know, like a systemic where you're going to have issues for a long period of time. And then there's mineral pesticides. So these are going to be based on, obviously mineral type products. And so one example is kaolin clay. And so this is an insecticide that can be kind of an irritant. So if an insect were to be, crawling on a plant that had kaolin sprayed on it, it might, it would make it feel irritated in its, face or mouth parts or legs or that sort of thing. So a lot of times this could be sprayed on like fruit trees, for example, and to try and keep the insects from laying eggs or from, feeding on the fruit. One thing to keep in mind with this, though, is that it's a clay, so it turns everything white. And so you wouldn't want to spray this onto your favorite ornamental plant or your roses or something like that, because then it would not look quite as attractive anymore. You're all probably heard of sluggo. So that's for slugs and snails and that sort of thing. And so that's an example of a mineral pesticide. Copper hydroxide is a common mineral product, which is a fungicide. And again, so this is, can be organic, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's, also a mineral because it comes from a natural source, but it can have a danger label because copper can be really corrosive to eyes. So keep that in mind. So that's one of those situations where organic or, natural products doesn't necessarily mean it's, 100% safe for humans. Sulfur is another example of a mineral, and it can be used either as insecticide or fungicide. Diatomaceous earth is actually the exoskeleton of algae. And so the exoskeleton of these particular algae are made of silica. And so the thought is that when you apply this to the ground, then a snail or insects, as they walk over it or slide over it, I guess, for the slugs and snails, that they will be irritated because it's kind of like going over glass, and that they'll be deterred. One thing to keep in mind with this, and I'd be actually really interested maybe at the end if there's time to hear if anyone's had experience with diatomaceous earth, because from what I have heard about this, it tends to only work well when it's dry. And of course, here in Oregon, when it's dry out is not when slugs are out. So I'd be kind of curious if anyone has any positive experiences with diatomaceous earth. And then boric acid is often a mineral that can be used for like ants, for example. So next is insect growth regulators. And so these are products that are sprayed on insects that will affect either egg hatch or molting. So here's an example of a lygus bug that's molting. So if you applied it to this insect prior to it molting, it would have a hard time, shedding its skin. And of course, insects have numerous instars. And so if you were to spray it, they could molt, and then that would cause that insect to die. So a couple things to note is that A, it's not going to work for adults because they're not going to be molting. And B, it's going to take a little while. So some of these products in general might take a little bit to work because you have to wait for them to complete their stages to get to the next instar before they're going to need to molt. So neem is an example, which I was talking about on the last slide. It's an example of an insect growth regulator. So this is kind of how it works, its activity when the plants get it on them. When it's sprayed, then they're going to have an issue when it's time to molt. So here, microbial pesticides. So these are things that are going to have a microorganism, whether it be a bacteria, protozoa, virus, or fungus. And then these products can be a fungicide sometimes or an insecticide. So that's mainly what I'm going to talk about. But they also can be products that kill nematodes or even weeds, although these are going to be less common, commercially, especially for home gardeners. But just so you kind of know that there can be viruses or fungi or bacteria that can negatively affect nematodes, for example, or like weeds, if you think that they could get a disease and not do as well, those sort of things do exist out there. Important to note with any of these, if you're buying a microbial pesticide, is that these products are all living. And so you need, you want to be able to use them to kill a pest later on or a fungus or whatever. You can't, purchase it and put it in your shed where it's 100 degrees in the summertime, and then come back 5 years later and think that it's still going to work well. So make sure you read the label, kind of keep that in mind, that storage of these is important. So some of these products that can be used are bacteria, and some of these examples are spinosad. So this might be something that you have heard of before. So, and BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. So both of these are bacteria that are derived from the soil. So they're two different bacteria, but they work in similar ways. So what happens with these is the bacteria, would be applied to a plant, and then the insect needs to chew the leaf, for example, and then ingest it. And then it has, with this photo here, you can kind of see they have like these crystals and spores inside of this particular product. And so then when it's eaten, it comes into their stomach, starts to separate. There's these toxins that will break out of the bacteria and start to cause issues inside the insect. There's spores in there that start to replicate. So this all causes the stomach within the insect to lyse or to start to have holes and issues, and then the insect will then die. So it kind of sounds like an unpleasant death if you're an insect, but maybe you're obviously probably okay with it if you're spraying it that way. So one thing to note with these products, especially BT, there's different formulations. So there's different subspecies of this particular bacteria. So some of them are going to work well for like caterpillars, some will work well for mosquitoes, some work well for beetles. The most common ones are going to be the ones for caterpillars. So it'll tell you on the label, this one, it says controls moth larvae, caterpillars. So that's the one you're going to want to use if you have a caterpillar issue. They also sell them quite a bit for ponds or fountains. I have some little it's like on a particular substrate, and I sprinkle it onto my fountain so I don't have mosquito larvae inside of my fountain. It works really well. So, but yeah, I have to make sure that I purchase the one that's specifically for mosquito pests. So keep that in mind. There are not products like this that are for sucking insects. So if you have aphids or whiteflies or something like that, unfortunately, these type of products aren't going to work for you, because these, as I mentioned, they need to be on the surface of the leaf and then they need to be consumed. So if you have an aphid, for example, they are putting their stylate inside the leaf and they're sucking out of the phloem. So kind of keep that in mind, that these products are really great. They're really effective, but like I said, they're only going to be for particular pests, and you need to make sure that you're, purchasing the right product for those particular pests. And there's also some of these other ones, or some other bacillus type products, but these are for other types of pests that they have in different parts of the country that we don't necessarily have here, but there are additional ones out there. There's also viruses that can be used as insecticides. And of course, these are really microscopic. They're not going to survive long outside of the organism because of the way that viruses behave. So a lot of times these types of organisms might be occurring naturally in the environment. So an example of these might be with like the Western oak looper or Douglas fir tussock moth. So a lot of these viruses just live naturally in our ecosystems and our forests, and then their populations kind of go up and down. And if there's low presence of virus in the population for a while, we might see some of these like Western oak looper populations go up, and you might see a lot of defoliation in trees. And then, after time, it kind of goes up and down. But there are some that are commercially available for home gardeners. And one example of this is a product called Sidex, which works really well for codling moth. And this is used a lot of times for small farms and organic systems. And so these need to be applied when the codling moth larvae are really small. So the way codling moth works is that the eggs are laid on the surface of the apple. And then when it hatches, the small first instar is going to, crawl along the surface, look for a place to, start chewing and enter the fruit. And so that's when this particular product would have to be applied. And that's generally true for, codling moth products in general. Just once the codling moth larvae enters the fruit, it's going to be really well protected, and it's going to be hard to, to kill that insect. But Sidex is something that if you grow apples or pears and deal with codling moth, that's something you could use. There are some other products, this Gyp Check product that could be used for gypsy moths. And again, that's not something we really have established here, fortunately. So fungi are next. So there are some fungi that can be applied to kill insects. Botanigard is one type of product. Bavaria bassiana is the scientific name or the Latin name of that particular fungus. And it can be used on, all kinds of different pests, aphids, grasshoppers, a few different things. So one thing to keep in mind with this is to kind of think of, for those of you that are master gardeners, and if you learned the disease triangle when you went through your master gardener training, you need to have a host, you need to have the pest, and then you need to have, or the disease organism, and you need to have the correct environment. And so even if you have the Botanigard, for example, so you have the fungus, and then you have your insect pest. If you don't have the right environment, you're not going to have the disease form on that insect, if that makes sense. That fungus isn't going to be able to grow and thrive. And so you need to kind of keep in mind that you need to have an environment that fungi would like, such as humidity and moisture. And so this is something that probably wouldn't work real well if you're applying it, on a 100-degree day in the summertime, for example. So kind of keep that in mind. There's also products that can be used for diseases. And these are often going to be used preventatively, because the way that these work is if you spray them onto a plant, for example, they are going to need to colonize kind of the outer layer of that plant. So you can think of it kind of covering the surface of a leaf, for example, if you sprayed it onto a leaf. And so when the disease then comes into play, that surface area of that leaf is already going to be colonized by these products. So a bacterial product or fungal product, so that that disease can't get in there and it can't access the leaf. So that's how these work. So they're going to be preventative. You have to spray them prior to having an issue. And that can be true in general, just with fungicides, that they don't really work well once you already have a raging disease. So these are bacterial products. This one is a bacteria that you would dip roots into. So we've used these before in the nursery industry, for example, that you'd have a bare root plant, and then you would dip the roots into this particular product. And then that would help for crown gall, which is what this disease is here. And so you have this Agrobacterium radiobacter all around colonizing those roots. And so when the crown gall comes in, it's not able to access the roots and cause disease. And so the same thing occurs here with this blight ban for Pseudomonas and the Serenade, which is a product that can be purchased for home gardens. And it's labeled for all kinds of different diseases: downy, powdery mildew, botrytis, bacterial spots. So again, you'd have to apply this prior to there being the disease, spores, or issue around in order for this to work. So some products that you might want to look for if you're a home gardener and you're looking for some kind of botanical or microbial type products would be spinosad, which I mentioned. So that's the bacterial product that works for insects. So it works really well for caterpillars, for SWD, which is spotted winged Drosophila. So I have a picture of one here on a cherry. So that's it's actually very effective for spotted winged Drosophila, for according to research. Thrips are another thing that they're effective for, but spinosad is not effective for sucking pests. So again, if you have your white flies or you have aphids or that sort of thing, spinosad is not going to be the product that helps you out. Same thing with BT. So that Bacillus thuringiensis works great for caterpillars, flies, like mostly mosquitoes. Sidex, as I mentioned, for codling moth is a good product. Neem is, works on many different kinds of insects. So if you had, like I was talking about, those aphids that you didn't really want to apply a toxic product for, neem might be an option, and same with like pyrethrin or pyrethrum. But again, with the pyrethrum, again, you have to worry about aquatic issues and then toxicity to bees. But like I said, it's not usually a long-term toxicity. So I put here a word cloud just because I was going through and I noticed that there's kind of a lot of terminology, a lot of terms that I'm using. So I'm hoping that you aren't all getting lost in all the different terms that I'm using. I just kind of wanted to show, with pesticide, I think there's all kinds of terms. Sometimes they'll mean really similar things. So I'm going to talk about a few more here for the next few minutes. But again, try not to get, you can always look up a term later on, and I'm hoping it can at least sound familiar to you. So next time you can hear it, you're like, oh yeah, that sounds kind of familiar. So there's certain categories of products that are defined by the EPA, the federal law, or USDA. And so you might have heard before of like biopesticides, reduced risk, minimum risk, or organic. And so I'm going to discuss a little bit about what these means quickly. So biopesticides, this is really similar to what I was talking about before with biorational products. The only thing is that biorational included minerals, and this one does not. So it has these biochemical, botanical, and pheromones, microbial pesticides, which we already talked about, and then plant incorporated protectants, which I'll talk about here in a second. And so, like I said, these biochemical pesticides, we've already talked about most of these except for pheromones. So this would be an example of, again, we can talk about codling moth, and maybe you want to put up a pheromone trap to monitor for these particular, codling moths emerging in the spring, for example. So that would be an example of a biochemical pesticide. And then of course, a lot of these things that we've already been talking about with botanical and plant-derived pesticides. One thing that we haven't talked about at all, and that is included in this last group that I've been talking about, is these plant incorporated protectants. And so these are including like naturally, like natural organisms as part of genetic engineering. So an example of this would be like BT corn. So they have that Bacillus thuringiensis, which has been incorporated into the corn genome, so that when caterpillars feed on it, then they're going to die just like if they ate BT. So that's not something we're necessarily going to see here, but maybe more so in Iowa or something like that, where they grow a lot of corn. But just so you know that that sort of thing exists and would be considered a biochemical pesticide. So you may have also heard about reduced risk pesticides, and sometimes like cities or states or something like that might have like a list of reduced risk pesticides that they want to encourage people to use. And generally that's an EPA program that incentivizes alternatives to organophosphates. And so they want chemical companies to develop new chemical classes that are safer to humans and safer to wildlife and have less of an issue with groundwater contamination. So if you see that list, or if you see the term reduced risk pesticides, then generally they're more than likely going to be less toxic than some other potential products out there. And then there's also minimum risk pesticides. And so these have ingredients which are determined to have low risk for the public and the environment. And so they have different labeling standards. And so a lot of oils are on this list, like corn gluten meal, dried blood, putrid egg solids. So you might want to, I think some of these, like the dried blood and putrid egg, might be more so for like deer deterrence. But kind of keep in mind that some of these products might not always be 100% effective, especially in all the insect pests that you want to manage. So you might want to do a little bit of research when it comes to some of these different products. All right, so organic pesticides. So this is a lot of gardeners will use organic pesticides, which is great. So these are going to be derived from something naturally occurring. So a lot of the things that we were just talking about, so it might be a botanical or a mineral or microorganism. And so the difference between these is that organic products need to be labeled by OMRI. So that's an organization, Organic Mineral Research Institute, is I think what the acronym stands for. And so if it's possible that you could have the same active ingredients, but a particular pesticide wasn't sent through OMRI to be approved. So, it might not be considered organic. So kind of keep that in mind. In order for something to have that organic label, it needs to be approved by this particular organization. And so one good thing about that is that they're also going to be looking at these inert ingredients when approving them for the organic list. So if you're worried at all about any of the inert ingredients within a pesticide, you could always, go with an organic product. And that way you at least know that those ingredients have been looked at as well. For a home gardener, it may not matter as much if you, stick to a product that has an organic label or not. But if you're a farmer, for example, and you went through the procedures to have, the organic seal on your products, you need to make sure that you're using organic pesticides if you're to use pesticides, because you have to have record keeping, make sure you're following the right organic practices so that as you're reviewed, you can keep your organic status. So some of the active ingredients that are often approved by OMRI and considered organic would be pyrethrin, diatomaceous earth, boric acid, neem oil, spinosad. Of course, BT would be on this list too. So, a lot of these things that we've been talking about most of this time would fit on this organic list. So a lot of times gardeners may think, I know that I've had friends that will say, oh, I bought this from the farmer's market and it's organic, so it doesn't have any pesticides on it. But that, of course, isn't the case. Organic pesticides are still pesticides that are concentrated and formulated to kill pests. They are often more safe to humans and to the environment, but it's not necessarily 100% the case. So you still need to, do your research and make sure that it isn't toxic to bees or aquatic systems or that sort of thing. So always, read the label for both hazards for humans and for the wildlife. So hopefully, I know I didn't have a ton of time here today, so I wanted to kind of give a brief overview. So hopefully I didn't use too many terms to be too daunting here. One place you can look if you have questions about some of these different things is the National Pesticide Information Center, and that's out of OSU. And that's kind of where this diagram here is from. So you can kind of look up some of these terms that I've been talking about. They have lists of different products. So you could look up, what are some biopesticides and that sort of thing, and look up, all kinds of different things. You can look at different pesticides and see, what do they do? What are their risks? Make sure when you go to the store, as I mentioned earlier, I always take the sticker off the back of the pesticide, and I will, look through the label to kind of look for some of these risks. You may want to do a little bit of research before you go to the store. What are some products that work well and that are safe? So you could use some of these websites like this. There's also a really good publication, How to Reduce Bee Poisoning from Pesticides. And so this is an OSU publication that has a big chart in there, a big table that has all, numerous different active ingredients. And then it has kind of like a low risk, medium risk, high risk for bees. So you can look at that. So if there's a product and you want to make sure that it's safe for bees, you can look through that table. And then the last thing I want to mention is that we have so many options for managing insects in home gardens. I mean, and plus it's not a commercial situation where you're trying to make money off of your garden. For me personally, if I have a particular plant that year after year it has insects or aphids or something going on, I usually just take it out because it's not, I'm not trying to make money. It's not life or death. I just put something else there instead. But we also have the option to, do things like try and spray the plant off with water. We can do selective pruning so that we open up the canopies. There's not as much disease pressure. We can pick off insects, that sort of thing. I often go with my flashlight in the evening to pick slugs or to pick cutworms or something like that off my plants. So we have a lot more options as gardeners. So I think it's really important that we use multiple methods, and that's really the most effective way to manage diseases or insect pests. So with that, I think we have about 10, 12 minutes here for questions. And so I believe Janet is going to help me with those, with letting me know what those questions are. And I don't know if you want me to stop sharing at this point,
Why don't you
Janet.
stop sharing,
Okay,
Heather?
great.
Okay, starting at the very top, let's see. Oh yes, when you were talking about produce in particular that may have a few flaws on it, check out imperfectfoods.com for a source of reasonably priced home food delivery of products, both manufactured and raw, which have imperfections, examples, fruit with scarring, and chocolate covered broken pretzels. Some stuff is just surplus. That's a good observation.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious too. Is it less expensive? Is it kind of like bargains because things might be broken? Or that sounds like a good idea.
Kathleen, can you respond to that? Unmute.
Yeah, I've been subscribing to this for a few months now, and every week you can order every week. It's a very specific schedule, and so far the products have been good. There've been an occasional dud, but of course there's an occasional dud just from the regular grocery store too. And it's especially now nice not to have to go out shopping as much. And they seem to be very, very determined to reduce the amount of waste in our food system. So just throw that out there.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the recommendation.
Sure.
Next question. How would you know that the middle ingredient is a neonicotinoid? And that's in reference to one of the labels you were showing us.
Right. Yeah, I think it was the rose spray that I was
Yes,
showing.
correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and so for that, you just have to look it up. I mean, that's kind of where it might be, I don't know, it's kind of a pain, I suppose, but it either maybe you want to take your phone with you. I mean, you probably do have your phone with you, but you might want to, you could Google a product, an active ingredient when you're doing it. I mean, for me, like I said, I worked in plant health and I'm pretty good at knowing my active ingredients, but for the average person, I think you just have to look it up, like I said, and Google it and see what chemical class it is. But like I said, I think it's really concerning for me personally, having worked with pesticides in a commercial setting, that so many home garden pesticides are this mix of all these random things that I think are overkill. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're shopping.
Next one, please expand your observation about boric acid and ants. I have a problem with small ants every spring.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think the best thing to do, I mean, I don't know, ever since I've lived in Oregon, I've dealt with ants. So it must just be an Oregon thing, I think, but no matter which house I've lived in. But yeah, I think there is a key that exists out there. And it might be from WSU perhaps, but there is a key that has, you can go through and identify your different ants. That might be helpful to know what kind of ant you have so that when you buy bait, you can use one that's more effective. I tend to really like, I don't know if it does have boric acid in it, but they're kind of like a liquid type product. I think it works well for the ants I have, but without knowing specifically what kind of ants you have, I mean, you might want to try a few different kinds of baits and try and identify your ant to see if you can get the best fit. But I think they're kind of a chronic problem in Oregon. It just seems like ants are so hard to get rid of.
An observation, I use food grade diatomaceous earth to successfully keep ants at bay when they explore moving indoors.
Well, that would be a good use of them because of the diatomaceous earth, because like I said, it can be less effective when wet. So if you're using it outdoors in the garden, but maybe, in your home where there's ants, it might help out a little bit more.
And another observation about it, I've had good results with diatomaceous earth protecting pea seedlings as they emerge. Kathy, even when it's raining? Kathy Clark? Oh, you have to unmute, honey.
There we go. Yeah, I just sprinkle it on over when I first see the first ones, I sprinkle it over that area. And I don't have the slug damage that I used to have at all. And even when it rains, I replenish it occasionally, but not with every rain. Usually about every third or fourth day, I will put some more on.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Next question, any recommendation for azalea lacewing that loves some of my azaleas and rhodies?
So I'm wondering if you mean the azalea lace bug, because the lacewing is a beneficial insect.
Yeah, I'm sure that's whatever I mean. They love my azaleas and rhodies.
So those sucking pests that leave
Yeah.
the kind of brown.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, those are tough.
I'll say they're tough.
To be honest, I mean, systemics probably are going to be the easiest to use, but like I said, you're gonna then have your bee issues. So you could either apply it right after they bloom, or you could, you could try some of these like neem or pyrethrin, but you're going to have to get really good coverage. And the hard part about rhododendrons is they're so tight that I think trying to get insecticide in there is going to be really tough. And so I think either you need to replace it
or I have some fabulous rhodies.
I know, or else accept some mottling and brownish foliage. So yeah, I mean, you can try your best to, like I said, use some of these products, or, use a hose to try and wash it off, or squish some azalea lace bugs, kind of know their biology and when they're coming, out and laying eggs, and try and get like the earlier populations, because they have multiple generations per year. So if you're, if you miss the first one, I think that I want to say that they start to come up more like May. I don't think it's real early, but so if they're out there and you don't get them initially, and then they're building and building, and you get to multiple generations by the end of the year, and then, they'll look even worse. So they're tough. That's all these invasive insects are really difficult.
I'm looking for a magic bullet.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, next question. Controlling pests on dahlias.
Do you know which pests you're referring to? Because I don't know if I know of
Jesse, can you respond to that if you unmute? Jesse Garcia? Jesse?
I don't know. I mean, I don't personally have a ton of pests on my dahlias. I mean, I get slugs as they're coming up in the spring, but otherwise, so I'm not really sure what Jesse's referring to.
And I don't, maybe Jesse left. Next question. Would you comment on what is known about toxicity to birds who might eat an insect or caterpillar that has ingested a biologic toxin?
Sure. So they're really specific to the insects. And so if a bird were to eat that, it's not going to have the same reaction in the bird's stomach. So they're really specific only to those pests. So it's not going to cause an issue for birds.
Let's see. Next question. Where are pheromone traps readily available? When should they be deployed?
So of course, it's going to depend which insect you're talking about. I don't know if a lot of garden centers really carry pheromone traps. I mean, you could check with, you could give them, a call now even, like when I mentioned pheromone traps, I was talking for codling moth. And so you could, give them a call in the wintertime or something and say, do you carry these in the spring? And they could tell you, yay or nay, but you may need to get it online. And then they would need to be applied, I don't know if like April or so. I'd need to look it up, but we have multiple OSU extension publications that kind of tell you like generally what time of year. And I mean, you can have them out and, have them there, and you just need to start checking them. I want to say like after bloom or something like that, but don't, I was gonna say, don't record me saying that. No, just kidding. But yeah, don't quote me on that. But yeah, you'd have to do a little bit. It depends on your insect and what kind of pheromone trap you're getting.
Okay.
But
Ellen Taylor has a observation that we were talking about before you all logged in. Most labels are also available online if you know the name of the manufacturer. And what we were laughing about was the very tiny print on those labels. And I frequently have to do that, is just look online, because
right.
my
Yeah, I
eyes
agree.
don't-
I always look them up online too, because yeah, you can use, they have a little feature where you can zoom in on it and you can read it better and take your time to do so. So yeah, I would definitely recommend looking them up online.
What product would I look for that contains SID-X?
So SID-X is the brand name.
Branding, yeah.
Yep. And so it's not, you might have to look around for it. I don't think you can find it necessarily anywhere. So you might want to make a few phone calls, but no, it's I forget the Latin name of the particular bacteria or virus I meant, but yeah, that's the label or the commercial name for trade name for that product, for that virus.
Marianne has a good piece of information. There's a free app called Bee Safety that you can look up ingredients for rating on toxicity on bees, works at home or store. Bee Safety, one word.
Great. Yeah, and then I saw somebody, Brenda, put in the chat the PNW 591 bee pesticide publication as well. So yeah, you could use either of those.
How long will nematodes last in the fridge? They are still in dry form, not mixed with water yet.
I'm not really sure. I think you'd have to check with the manufacturer on that. I mean, I'm guessing it's not going to be a long period of time. I think normally when you purchase that sort of thing, you should use it, as soon as you can.
Jesse is back. Sorry, I was on mute. The pest on dahlias is a beetle. I do not recall the name. It is dark brown, yellow striped beetle.
I wonder if it's some sort of like cucumber beetle type product. I think that there is like a striped cucumber beetle. So I wonder if that's
it. That's
okay.
it, the cucumber beetle.
Okay, great. Yeah, I wish I had some good recommendations, but like cucumber beetles and flea beetles and some of that. I mean, the hard part is that you would, and like I said, if there was a BT that you could find for beetles, that might work. But the hard thing is with those different types of pests is that they fly in all the time from, outside the garden, outside your yard. And so, every time a new one comes in, then you'd have to try and manage that one and try and kill that one, if that makes sense. And then of course it flies off and then you get new ones in. And so I wish I had a silver bullet for those, but unfortunately you might just have to tolerate a little bit of chew marks. But
that's the end of the questions, but I'm going to make a plug for the Corvallis Evening Garden Club. We are beginning February 1st. We are going to be selling seeds online. We can all agree. I think we can all agree that what Heather told us this evening was very helpful, because we do want to get rid of the bugs we don't like, but we sure don't want to hurt the bees. So thank you very much, Heather. This was terrific. And if there's no last minute announcements from anyone, I'm going to tell Deb to kick us off. Good night, everybody.